Okay. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. I know many of you are watching later when it's recorded, but we always wait a little bit at the front to let people who are watching it live get a chance to tune in. So while we're waiting for that, let us light up the darkness. Right. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if it's later and you're watching it not live, it's still great when you tell us where you're tuning in from, what you're learning, what you're curious about. I do try to look at that day's comments a little bit later. Hello, Ivan Bauman in the house from Las Vegas. Welcome, Judith Sobel. Shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Great to see you here today. So, where are we holding? Volume 1 of the Talmud. We're still in chapter 6. We've been looking at blessings, the various blessings that we make over food, the way that the blessings interact with each other, the way that they're formulated. We've been getting a little bit into the weeds on some of these blessings. They're getting very particular. And the takeaway that we've had on a few of these pages has been, the basic idea. Why are we so particular with the blessings? Why are we so specific with the blessings and the order of the blessings and which food gets which blessings? And it's just this idea that we're grateful, right? We're grateful to God for all the blessings that we've been given. And just as if we were so fortunate as to be invited, to have dinner at the home of a fine chef, and he's serving hot cuisine, as it were, we could say to him after the meal, or even before the meal, but especially after the meal, we could say, what a great meal. But it would be better if we said, the chicken was so good, and the way that you roasted it, and the consistency, and, so the more specific we are with the compliment, the more connected we are with the giver of the gifts. Okay? So today we're going to actually, unprecedented for AT Daily, the first time we're doing this, we're going to cover 2 Dafs, 2 pages. We're going to get a page ahead of the Daf Yomi schedule, which is great. First of all, it's going to give us some leeway in case something should ever come up. Second, I know that some people can't watch it till later. They really wish that they had the show on that daf at the time that they're reading it, or even before they read it. Since with my show, I don't do every piece of information that is on that page, right? This is a be'eyin shur, highlights, right? I do crucial highlights. Crucial according to who? According to me, right? I'm just sharing what stands out to me on each page of the Talmud, where I can go in a little bit deeper, give a little more detail, something that is exciting to me, so it should be exciting to you. If you are doing the Daf Yomi cycle, and I'm actually curious, maybe people will say in the comments, are you just watching the show and sort of, interested in the highlights that I'm calling out, or are you doing Daf Yomi and you're reading the whole page every day? And this is a way to go a little bit deeper, sort of beyond your own personal study. Are you attending somebody else's shir or an online shir? Right. So typically a Daf Yomi shir, the teacher, shir means class, the teacher will just very fast read every bit of information that's on that page, and typically much more experienced than I am, like a true rabbi with a lifetime of experience in Talmudic learning. And he's going to translate every word and go into the notes and answer questions and just do more than I'm capable of doing. What I'm doing is I'm working with the Koran. At times I will work with the art scroll, but especially when we're in tractate Berachos, I'm working with the Koran, Talmud Bavli. And why that's important as we're in Berachos here is because so much of what we learn in Berachos affects our everyday life. And so when these questions come up of how, what blessing we recite before eating a particular food and how it changes when other foods are present, etc., the rabbis will go back and forth, the sages will go back and forth, and it's not clear often from the discussion where the law ended up. And what a nice feature of the Koran is that there are notes in the margins, like right here, that tell you what the halacha is, right? So where it ended up, where the discussion finally ended up. And sometimes the law was one way in the times of the Talmud, but conditions changed, and later sages, as it were, later commentators with authority said that, well, actually the law is a little bit different. In order to apply the principle that the sages laid out, when conditions changed, the law became a little bit differently and became a little bit different. And so to know what the halacha is today, what the law is today, it's just so useful that whenever that kind of question comes up in the Talmud, the editors of the Koran, working with Rav Steinsaltz in Jerusalem, such a great, gifted, and sweet sage with a very edgy sense of humor. I was privileged to meet Rav Steinsaltz, whose translation and commentary the Koran embodies. But a feature of this edition of the Talmud is that where these questions lie, the halakha is stated right on that page, okay? So, let us proceed. Today we're going to do two Dafs, 2 pages, pages 41 and 42 of Berachos, or the highlights that I'm choosing for that. Oh, Fred Rare, you donated. Thank you so much. I'm not making a big deal out of the donate button. There will be our big annual fundraiser coming up next month. But I've been encouraged to have the donate button on because it's a big merit to anybody who donates to our page, simply because when you enable Torah study, when you enable others to learn Torah, enable others to teach Torah, you're really a partner in that process. And enabling the word, as it were, to get out there, enabling people to have their eyes open and to learn what the law really says and what Scripture really says according to our sages. It's a huge merit to the people who participate in that, and that is, let's say, money very well spent, very well invested. It will return to you 100-fold with blessings in your life. So we just enable people to do that, and thank you, Fred. And I wasn't going to do this, but it's just been a tradition at Accidental Talmudists to do this for a long time. And since we're in the week of Torah portion Yitro, when the 10 Commandments were given, and we read in this week's Torah portion that the people, heard the ever-growing sound of the thunder around Mount Sinai when God appeared and gave the 10 Commandments, and it sounded like a shofar that grew and grew. It's a great time to blow the shofar. So this one's for you, Fred, for donating. This is dedicated to you. May you and all your loved ones enjoy great health, meaning, joy, and prosperity in all your endeavors. And thank you for partnering with us and supporting our nonprofit. All right, let's get into it. So on page 41, we're going to get a very important teaching that we do rely on here in modern times from Rabbi Hiyya. Who was Rabbi Hiyya? Rabbi Hiyya is a great personality in the Talmud. He is a descendant of King David. He is one of the last of the Tanaim, the Tanas, right? So the Tanas, or the Tanaim, plural, are the earlier sages. The earliest of them lived while the Second Temple still stood, but they continued that sort of, it was a few generations of rabbis, but what distinguishes them from the Amoraim, the later rabbis, is that the Tanas are the ones who contributed to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah was set down in about the year 200, and the Gemara, also known as the Talmud, would be sort of set down in the year, around the year, 500-600, right? A little bit later. And, and so it's the Tanas that, their teachings are in the Mishnah, and then the next few generations of rabbis commenting on the teachings of the rabbis of the Mishnah are going to be the Amoraim, and their teachings are going to be in the Gemara, right? That first outer layer. The Mishnah is the core of the oral teachings that were set down. They had to be written down lest they be forgotten. lest the persecution of the Romans result in these teachings being forgotten from Israel. I've gone over this before. I don't need to review it every time. The point is that Rabbi Hiyya is one of the last of the Tanaim, and speaking hyperbolically about his gift for teaching and for revealing truths from the written word and making it understandable and accessible and true, right, for the people. It was said of him that let me just get this right. It's so nice how it was said of him. Speaking, hyperbolically to exaggerate, but to get the sense of how important he was. It was said of him when he ascended to Eretz Yisrael from Babylonia with his family. Some, engaging in hyperbole, said that the Torah was about to be forgotten until he came from Babylonia and reestablished it. Now, of course, that's not so. There were already sages working very hard at Yavne to establish, what the tradition would be in the wake of the destruction of the Second Temple. But Rabbi Hiyya was that important in that project. He became a very close friend of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Yehuda the Prince, and it was Yehuda the Prince who would become the editor and redactor of the Mishnah, right? So he worked with Yehuda Hanassi on the Mishnah, and he was also the uncle of Rav, who was known as the rabbi of all Israel, and an important, super important rabbi. And so Rabbi Hiyya was sort of that bridge between that earlier set of generations, the Tanaim, and the next few generations called the Amoraim. Okay? So we really pay attention when there's a teaching of Rabbi Hiyya. And he comes to teach on our page a simple, basic teaching that we've referred to a few times lately, but now we're seeing it directly from Rabbi Hiyya. He said, bread exempts all the types of food that one eats after it, and wine exempts all types of drinks that one drinks after them. And one need not recite a blessing either before or after eating them. Right? So this is the simple idea that we keep referring to, that bread is the most superior of the foods when it comes to reciting a blessing before a meal. Right? If we're going to eat, a few different kinds of vegetables, so if one is not primary, we may have to recite more than one blessing. But if we eat a cracker and a steak, as we said yesterday, the cracker, because it's made of grain, that is more important, more significant blessing than the shehakol, catch-all blessing that meat gets. So we would actually bless the cracker, eat that, and then that would exempt the steak. But the ideal way to eat any meal is to eat bread first, make a blessing over the bread, in fact, wash hands and make a blessing over washing hands, then make a blessing over the bread, and now the bread exempts all the food which is going to be a part of that meal. All of the things that you're going to ingest as a part of that meal, except wine. Wine is separate. Wine is so important, and it's so important in the practices of Israel. Wine was a libation on the altar. Wine is used to make a separation between the mundane and the festive. Right? When we go into Shabbat, into the Shabbat dinner, we'll make a kiddush. And there's other times when we'll make a kiddush over wine. So wine is very significant. And when we make a blessing over bread to exempt all the other foods of the meal, we do that, but it doesn't exempt the wine. Wine has to get its own blessing. Once we make that blessing over wine at the beginning of the meal, so then all other liquids that we're going to drink, including fancy, expensive booze, whatever, you could have the cheap, not so great Manischewitz wine at the beginning, make a blessing over that, and then, later you could have the $300 scotch. You don't make a new blessing over the scotch. It was exempted by the blessing you made at the beginning of the meal with the wine. What happens if you're eating a meal and you didn't make a blessing over wine at the beginning, but during the meal somebody decides, you know what, we're having such a nice dinner, this is such good company, let's have some wine, right? And so the wine comes out during the meal. So in that case, we have to make a blessing over the wine, And in that situation, everybody who drinks the wine makes his own blessing. Whereas where we had the wine at the beginning of the meal, one person could make the blessing and have in mind that he was doing it for the other people, and they would have in mind that he was making a blessing on their behalf, and they will answer Amen, and then they're exempt. But if the wine comes out during the meal, then everybody has to make their own blessing over the wine in order to drink it. Let's talk about pizza. Pizza is an interesting question. In the observant Jewish world, there's actually a lot of opinions about pizza and how to handle pizza. Why? Because if you look at pizza, the pizza crust is basically bread, right? So are you going to make a mizonos blessing over, and I see that some donations are coming in. Let me just finish this thought, and then I'm going to scroll back up and we'll give people their shofar blast. But pizza, if you think about it, what's on that crust, the crust is bread, right? It's essentially a baked, grainy substance that comes out. It's thin, but it's bread, okay? So shouldn't we make the bread blessing? But it's not really bread because it's thin and we're eating a small, and if we're just having one slice of pizza, it's not a meal. So it's a little unclear. So here we have a teaching that's going to help us figure out what to do with pizza. So the teaching is now on page 42. We're moving on to Daf 42. And it says, Rav Huna ate 13 substantially sized sweetened loaves. So this is not standard bread. This was the kind of grain product that would get a mizonos blessing, right? When we bless God who creates various kinds of nourishment, borei minei mizonos, right? That's not a bread blessing. It's a grain product that is not bread, right? Why is that important? Because we don't make the bread blessing. It can exempt the rest of the meal from making blessings, but then after the meal, we would do the abridged version of the grace after meals. It's much shorter, but it does contain thanking God for the grain and for the nourishment, for the land, that he should rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, etc. As opposed to if you just eat an egg, you would make the shehakol blessing, and then afterwards, just a very short borei nefashos blessing, which basically says, who makes the various kinds of life and their needs, right? God who makes various kinds of life and gives them what they need. Much, much shorter after blessing. Okay, so Rav Huna would eat all these grain products, right? These sweetened loaves, 3 loaves per cob of flour. He ate 13. It's like, imagine, before we had the rugula yesterday, right? So imagine like a pastry. Imagine a pastry, and he eats 13 pastries. So he's very hungry. He has a capacity to eat a lot. And like anybody who ate that much would be full. It's a meal, right? And the idea is that when we have a meal, after the meal, we say the grace after meals. Whereas those abridged versions, when we have just the grain product, it's abridged because really what it is the grace after a snack, not a meal, right? When we have a meal, we should try to eat bread with it so that there's no question, okay, we made a blessing over the bread because we had a meal, right? And then we can say the grace after the meal. And we get into these tricky areas when we eat enough food that it's like a meal, but we didn't have bread. And that's a question that's being asked here. Rav Huna ate all these pastries. Anybody else would have been full. So one does not typically, so what it says is, so he ate those 13 substantially sized sweetened loaves, and he did not recite the grace after meals because they were not genuine bread. Rav Nachman said to him, that is hunger. He summed it up. Yes, that is hunger. One does not typically eat that much merely as dessert. Rather, over anything which is substantial enough to satiate and others base a meal upon it, then one must recite the grace after meals. So this gets tricky. If he ate like enough food that is normally considered a meal, but there was no bread, should he say the grace after meals? I'm not going to right now make any kind of, bring down a general teaching about that. But in the case of pizza, where this comes up all the time, what do you do when you're eating pizza, right? When you and your friends order a pizza and like that's all you're gonna eat is the pizza, do you say, is it a meal? Do you make it a motzi or a mizonos before you eat? And do you say the full grace after the meal or just the abridged version that you say over a snack that includes grain products? And the answer is, drum roll, in modern times, it's not universally accepted. There's some say this and some say that. Some say if you have 2 slices of pizza or more, then it's a meal. If you only have 1 slice, it's a snack. So if it's a snack, you say mizonos before you eat it and the abridged blessing afterward. But if you have 2 slices or more, then it's a meal and you make a motzi over it like you're eating bread and the full grace after meal after you've had the pizza. The people who hold that way also say that if you only have 1 slice or even half a slice, but you're eating it with, let's say, salad and French fries, right? And the amount of pizza that you're eating with the salad and French fries is sort of akin to eating bread with your salad and French fries, so then it's a meal, right? It's like you had bread with a meal and you made it a meal, so then you wash, you say the hamotzi, the bread blessing, and the full grace afterward. Others say it has to be really substantial for the meal requirement to kick in. What is really substantial? 3 slices. So here, which way are you going to hold? If you're a Jew, these are laws for Jews. Let's clarify that. This is not, for non-Jews. This is strict requirements. So many of these teachings, you can learn from it, but they apply to you if you're a Jew. When we're teaching Noahide laws, right, the 7 laws that apply to all of humanity, we'll be careful to note that. Okay, so if which are you? Are you going to hold that 2 slices of pizza makes a meal, or 3 slices makes a meal, or like the bread equivalent along with the salad? So ask your rabbi. Right? There you go. Okay, let me proceed. Bread exempts. Bread does not exempt wine. Mizonos pizza. Very good. If we had a meal and it's bread meal, right? So we're having a real meal and we ate bread at the beginning, okay? And we had the full meal and then the meal ended, okay? The meal ended, we stopped eating, and now if we then said the grace after the meal, like the Birkat Hamazon, the full grace afterward, and then we said, you know what, I'm still kind of hungry. Let's have a snack. Let's eat a little more. So you reset the blessing clock, as it were, and for sure now you have to, whatever you're going to eat, you're going to need to make a blessing over it, and whatever its requirements are. Are you having a pastry? Are you having another full bread meal? Are you just having, some ice cream, etc.? Now you're going to have to make new blessings. The meal that, when you add food after the meal was over and you said the grace after the meal, so for sure, if you have to make a new blessing before and after, whatever's required for that new food. The question is, did the meal end? If we said the grace after the meal, for sure it ended. What if we had a full meal and then we started talking Torah and we got really into it and we were talking for an hour? And we stopped eating an hour ago, but we didn't get around to saying the grace after the meal. So has the meal ended in case we now eat more food? Is it covered, right? This is actually a tricky situation. The rabbis are going to discuss this. And there's going to be a few different opinions. One is, well, if the dishes were removed, so then the meal was over. So then if we ate more food, requires a new blessing. Another says, if the table is removed. Now, when the sages in the Talmud are talking about the table being removed, we should note that they very rarely would have sat around a table like we sit around a table in chairs. That's not how they ate their meals. They sat on the ground, and a table was like a big piece of leather, right? It was a hide or a big piece of leather that would be laid in between. And you see that even today, certain Bedouins will be like that. They sit on the ground and they're all around, the table, which is really just the place where the food is laid out, separated from the ground by some kind of a covering. So the table was much easier to remove, right? They could just pick up the piece of leather and take it out, and now the table's gone. But that really signals that the meal ended. But there was a case where one of the rabbis, I think it was Rav Papa, they took away the table, and then he ate some more without saying a new blessing. And they said to him, why did you do that? He said, well, look where we are. Where were they? They were at the table of the exilarch, right? So they were in Babylonia, and the head of the Jewish community, right, instead of being called the patriarch or the monarch, was called the exilarch, right? Exillarch, meaning the head of the community in exile, right? They were at his table, a very, very distinguished, prominent person, and he had not finished his meal, right? So I guess in that case, probably they didn't take away the table, they took away the dishes. But the head was still eating, right? And so Rav Papa said, well, I'm relying on the fact that the meal must not be over if the head of the household, he's still eating, right? He's still engaged in the meal. So that's another way to measure. And because it could become confusing when the meal actually ended and when we have a responsibility to, move into the after blessing so that we don't have this confusion about whether we add a new blessing or not, they took on the custom of the Mayim Acharonim. Right? I don't have mine here. I was going to bring it, but I forgot. But, very often it would just be like, if you're like at a meal where they don't have the nice silver cup and the sort of dish underneath it where you can pour water. So very often at a meal without fancy silver utensils, right? You might just have two glasses like this, and you have water in one and the other to receive the water, like here. And then you just put like your fingertips here and just put a little water over your fingertips. It's a symbolic hand washing. It's not like you're really cleaning your hands by just running a little bit of water over your fingertips. There is some kind of a teaching that you want to remove salt from your fingertips lest you then rub your eyes and get salt in your eyes, which could be very painful. But more important than that is this symbolic ending of the meal. Like when we wash our hands at the table at the end of the meal, and even in the religious world, the religious Jewish world today, not everybody has this custom. It's, I think, more common in the Hasidic world. But like I said, even in the religious world, not everybody does this, but a lot do, and we have taken this on, especially by Shabbat dinner. So when we're done, right, we're not going to eat more, so we wash our fingers. And now it's like, we're not going to eat more. That's the point. We have signaled to ourselves and to those seated with us, the meal is over. And then the key is, once we wash our fingertips, the after meal washing, we move right into the grace after the meal. And you don't want to have an interruption between that meal washing and the grace after the meal. And you certainly don't want to eat anything between that hand washing and the grace. Move right into the grace. Then, after you said the grace after the meal, should you, like we said earlier, want to eat some more, now you have a whole new set of blessings for that piece of food. And that is it. Those are the teachings that I wanted to share related to these two pages, Dafs 41 and 42 of Tractate Berachos. Okay? What is our takeaway? I think the key is, let's remember Rabbi Hiyya, this incredibly sweet, learned, pious man who, was credited with saving Torah. I mean, in a generation where there were great sages, including his colleague, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, there was something about him and his teaching and his ability to be clear that was just very endearing to everyone in Israel. And it's from Rabbi Hiyya that we learn that bread exempts all the other foods that come after it, right? So when we make the motzi at Friday night dinner and it exempts all the foods that come after it, we might think of Rabbi Hiyya. And I want to make a shout out here to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. There's just so many gifted teachers. I could name, just off the top of my head, 20 great teachers. But today I just want to mention Rabbi Sachs because I have been davening from the Koren Siddur, the Koren prayer book. That's a relatively new prayer book that features his introduction to prayer. And I got to say, there's just something about Rabbi Sachs that he takes information that you've heard before and states it with an emotional impact and a clarity that makes it like you're hearing it for the first time. And I can imagine a little bit that the way his contemporaries felt about Rabbi Hiyya is a little bit the way some people feel when they're, have the privilege to hear Rabbi Sachs teach. And I'm sorry that I missed him when he was in LA a few weeks ago. Of course, when he came to LA from London, I was in Boston and New York on a family trip. But that's life. Maybe I'll get to meet him next time. That is it. I saw that a couple people donated. They're becoming our partners in sharing Torah with the world, and that is a great merit for them. And so for Sandy Murray, this is a shofar blast for you. May you and all your loved ones enjoy great meaning, health, joy, and prosperity. And there was another one. And this one is for Sharon Ashford. I just don't want to miss any others. I think that was it. Sharon Ashford, this one is for you. May blessings rain down upon you and your family like manna from heaven. All right. We won't always be able to do that. We have to keep the class moving. But it is so nice to blow the shofar in the week of Torah portion Yitro, when the Ten Commandments are given. And we've heard the Ten Commandments many times. We need to think about the Ten Commandments. A lot of people will say in this world we're not really connected to faith, and the teachings of our ancestors. And they say, well, I'm a good person. And when you say, well, what do you mean by you're a good person? They say, well, I follow the Ten Commandments. And when the people say they follow the Ten Commandments, what they mean is, well, they don't murder, right? They don't commit idolatry. They don't commit adultery. God, please God, they don't. When the Ten Commandments say don't steal, right? People mean they don't steal, but the Ten Commandments do not say don't steal. What they mean, what is that? It's like the seventh commandment. Is that the sixth or I think it's the seventh commandment. Don't steal there actually means don't kidnap, right? And the reason is that is a commandment that is surrounded by commandments that bear the death penalty, and stealing is not a death penalty commandment, but kidnapping is. So that's nice. We don't kidnap, we don't murder, we don't commit adultery or idolatry. Beautiful. But Shabbos, keeping Shabbos properly, is one of the 10 commandments. And the 10th commandment is one that pretty much everybody violates unless they refine themselves through constant personal work to really an astonishing degree, right? What is the 10th commandment? Do not covet, right? Don't desire something that other people have. Can we honestly say that we never looked at something that our friend has and say, oh, I want that, right? Now, it's unclear whether it means I want it so, and then he won't have it, or just I want to have the same thing. Maybe we admire his watch or his house or his car, and I'm like, I want that. And to overcome coveting takes an astonishing degree of faith, because what it means is when you overcome coveting, and say you just completely trust God, and like whatever I have is what God wants me to have, and I don't need anything that other people have. I may have goals, I may work toward things, but I'm not going to want it just because others have it, and I certainly don't want it at their expense. And that takes great personal work. And a shout out to our table for 5 this week, which is about the 10th commandment, do not covet. And Nina gave an amazing, beautiful drasha on that, a beautiful contribution. So it's on our page. Just scroll down 1 or 2 slots, and you will find this week's table for 5 with 5 beautiful commentaries, including Nina's, on the 10th commandment, do not covet. All right, my holy brothers and sisters, may you have a beautiful Thursday. I'm sending you big love from LA. I suspect that tomorrow's show will be a little earlier than today because then we got to pack up and head out. Nina and I are going to be speaking at the Chabad in Agora Hills. So if you're in the LA area and you can make it to Shabbos, we're going to be doing our Shnooks at Sinai talk tomorrow night by the Chabad in Agora Hills. And then I'll be giving the Saturday morning sermon at Shul, and it's going to connect the 10 Commandments to that day's Daf, which now we're one day ahead on AT Daily, which is nice, but it'll be that day's scheduled Daf, which a little preview. I'll be talking about it in tomorrow's show, and then in the sermon much more extensively on Saturday. But tomorrow, in the page we'll be covering tomorrow, page 43 of Berachos, spectacular, famous teaching. And that is, a person should rather jump into a fiery furnace than humiliate another person publicly. So more to come about that with God's help. All the best, my holy brothers and sisters.